The question, though, is will Donald Trump step back as countries now begin to stand up to him? To try and decode this for you on the broadcast, I'm joined by Victor Gao. He is a chair professor at the Soochow University. He's going to be giving us the Chinese perspective. Professor Mark Bush, former cleared advisor to the United States Trade Representative and Department of Commerce, joining us, giving us the American perspective on things. Professor Nicholas Lamb, former dispute settlement lawyer at the World Trade Organization, is going to be helping us understand the Canadian perspective. And Vivek Banka, financial expert, is here with us in India, who's going to be giving us how this entire tariff wall will be impacting India. Good evening and namaskar to all of you. First of all, Victor Gao, to you, how is China viewing this? The fact that you've now imposed retaliatory tariffs against the United States of America. The US says China had promised that they're going to be stopping the fentanyl production and, the transportation of it illegally across American borders. That hasn't stopped, and that's why Donald Trump is going ahead with the tariffs.
Thank you very much for having me. It's very obvious that the Trump administration is generalizing tariff and weaponizing tariff, not only against China, but also to countries like Canada, Mexico, and most likely to many other countries, including European countries. Now, this is a very dangerous sign. It will not solve the problems the United States is faced with. It will only keep inflationary pressure high in the United States, further eroding the quality of life of the American people. The tariffs are paid by the American people. It's kind of like a tax against the American people. While it will make economic activities in China or in Canada or in Mexico or all the affected countries more difficult, it is hardly to be expected that manufacturing jobs will be relocated back to the United States as a result of these tariffs. The United States need to do a lot of homework to make sure that they can really attract manufacturing jobs from other countries back to the United States or start new manufacturing activities in the United States. There are many more problems to be solved than simply levying tariffs against other countries. The tariff war launched by President Trump and his administration eventually will fail miserably, and the American people will suffer.
Professor Mark Bush, do you want to come in on this? Victor Gao said this is the tariff war that is not going to help the United States of America. And this is something that billionaire investor Warren Buffett had said as well, that tariff is an act of war. How much do you think it's actually going to help the American economy?
I don't think this is going to help the American economy at all. And I don't know how else to put it, because as was previously stated, this is fundamentally a tax on American consumers. It's going to disrupt crucial supply chains. The one that's getting all the attention right now is autos. And at the end of the day, this is going to isolate the United States and the global economy by virtue of the fact that President Trump is defying U.S. tariff concessions under both the World Trade Organization and our preferential trade agreements, not least being USMCA, which is something that he penned himself. So when you take a look at the estimates as to what will happen with the 25%, and just taking that before you even calculate in retaliation, this is going to be about $2,000 per household, which is not inconsequential given that most Americans went to the polls trying to do something about inflation. Add in the fact that Canada and soon Mexico will retaliate, and given the fact that the executive order that Trump originally issued has an escalation mechanism to raise the tariff in the event of Canadian and Mexican retaliation, who knows where this is going? But I can tell you this, the market's just got a brief glimpse of the damage that will be done, and they're going to respond even more negatively in the coming weeks.
Professor Bush, then help me understand. You say, and a lot of people say that this is not going to help the American economy. This is, in fact, going to put more burden on the American citizens. Why would Donald Trump then take such steps time and again, repeatedly, since he's assumed office for a second time? Is it just political messaging, or the businessman in Donald Trump has something in mind?
He believes this. And he made that clear in the video that you showed to your viewers. He said, bring your car factories and your other production facilities here to the United States. We call this tariff skipping foreign direct investment. And he has a belief that if you raise a tariff wall, that to get on the inside, you'll relocate to the United States. This is a stunning refusal on the president's part to understand the complexity of the supply chain in 2025. This is not about relocating one plant. This is about relocating an entire value chain. You've got parts that are moving across the US, Canada, US, Mexico border 8 times to produce a rear differential on a car. This is not something that will be done overnight. It won't be done for free. And for that matter, it won't be done in any reasonable way that won't inflict damage on the American consumer.
Yeah, Vivek Banka, you want to come in on this? The fact that even in the previous Trump presidency, there were concerns in the automobile industry, the fact that supply chains would be disrupted, the fact that equipments and car parts will be costing more as a result of the tariffs that he's imposing. This time, once again, that concern has been raised in the industry.
Thanks for having me. So I would like to take a step back and see what's happening with Trump and in particular the Indian perspective. So if you see Tesla itself, there are some murmurs of possibly a rift between Trump and Elon Musk over the next few months. India is wooing Tesla to come to India and manufacture, while Trump is clearly not happy with that development. And sooner or later, I think Tesla, considering the Indian market, will be forced to come into India. Tesla is also fighting several battles with its Chinese counterparts like BID. In terms of the US perspective of automobiles, surely there will be an impact. And over the next few months, I think very interesting and very scary times. As the other guests have pointed out, the entire actions that are being undertaken right now are extremely abrupt. Though the entire world was, in a way, prepared for such actions by Trump, unfortunately, no amount of preparedness can, help us tide this in a smooth manner. So if you see, the US markets are already cracking big time. Indian markets have already been bad. We don't know how the currencies will play out in this scenario. Trump, in his last presidency, has been known to be a very big advocate of lower interest rates. While with these steps, the only thing which he will do is increase inflation in the US. So it is a very dynamic situation, and only how the US will manage this entire conundrum of pressure on interest rates due to these tariffs and managing growth, only time will tell.
Okay. Professor Nicholas Lamb, the Trump administration has been arguing that Canada puts something called the national sales tax, which is equal to the kind of high tariffs that US accuses Canada of putting against US goods and the kind of money that they have to shell out to enter Canadian territory. And therefore they say that Canada needs to pay up. Canada needs to sort of balance out what it has been demanding from America.
Well, this is one of the grounds on which tariffs are being imposed on Canada. The tariffs that we're dealing with now are not imposed on those grounds, right? So this is completely unfounded. It's what Canada has is a sales tax, which has to be paid by domestic producers as well. Anyone who wants to sell products in Canada is paying the sales tax. So there's no way in which this tax is in any way discriminatory. And in fact, of course, in many US states, you also have a sales tax. So that's completely unfounded. But the tariffs that we're dealing with now are, of course, a fundamental threat to the Canadian auto industry. And I'm very afraid that actually the Trump administration will succeed in the long term, because, of course, it's impossible for the US car makers to kind of build the factories that they currently have in Canada in the United States in the short term. So in the short term, there are going to be huge disruptions. Cars are going to become more expensive. But of course, one impact of these tariffs, even if they are rescinded tomorrow, is that nobody will invest in Canada again, counting on entering the US market, right? So he's created uncertainty, he's created distrust of the United States, and that achieves his aim because all new investment will go into the United States. So even if somehow the tariffs go away and the Canadian car manufacturing industries survives this, the future looks very bleak because all the future investment will go into the United States. So I think, unfortunately, in the long term, he may achieve his objectives at a very huge cost, of course, to U.S. consumers, but also, and of course, to Canada.
Victor Gao, do you not think that the kind of tariffs that Donald Trump is now slapping against, say, China, it has, of course, resulted in the past impacting supply chains. And with that, the kind of, manufacturing that goes on in China might just end up in other countries, say in Taiwan, in India, in Vietnam. Are there concerns in China about that?
Are you asking the question to me?
Yes. Yes, Mr. Gao, to you. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. I think in China over the past decade or so, there has been huge outflow of manufacturing jobs to either the neighboring countries, to ASEAN countries, and also to countries like Mexico. It is true. Part of the reason is that China has reached such a high level of manufacturing, and it is logical and natural to move some of the manufacturing jobs out of the country to some other lower cost countries. Now, China and the United States can definitely work on this and try to cooperate rather than to manhandle each other. But the way the United States government is doing this is completely wrong. It does not show respect to countries like China or Canada or Mexico, for example. It actually inflames the situation and makes the whole problem even worse, and without solving the problems really facing the United States. Now, you talked about fentanyl. Fentanyl is not an illegal drug. Fentanyl is widely used in medicine production. All China's export of fentanyl to other countries is completely legal and according to international law. The United States should go after those companies or those countries which use fentanyl to generate illicit drugs and smuggle them into the United States. I'm afraid that with or without fentanyl, the Trump administration can come up with other excuses out of thin air, try to launch this tariff war against China or against so many other countries. I would say other countries should really be scared and should stand up to defend their own legitimate interest, rather than just suffering the consequences of huge pressure from Washington. It is wrong for the United States to weaponize tariff. It is wrong for the Trump administration to completely disregard the fundamental interest of the American consumers, because they are really further inflaming the inflation in the United States, which is hugely detrimental to the fundamental interests of the American people.
It's interesting, Mr. Victor Gao, that you say that, and Professor Mark Bush, I want to know your opinion on this. The fact that, countries are now starting to stand up against Donald Trump, against what he's been doing, against what he's saying. How much of that would actually have an effect? How much of that is actually a concern in Donald Trump's mind? Because, say, for example, China, it could, in the near future, restrict the critical minerals that are used in iPhone manufacturing or military equipment manufacturing. Isn't he concerned about that?
He's definitely concerned about that, and he has a lot of concerns that go beyond that. For example, probably the best way to get him to correct his tariffs would be to witness more of the stock market reactions that we've been seeing over the past 24 hours. That is perhaps the bellwether test that Trump likes to make recourse to. However, there is a big difference between the retaliatory strikes being declared at the moment and what we witnessed under Trump 1.0. I have to say that Mexico in particular strikes me as taking a very creative approach to retaliation this time around. the idea that they might use what's called carousel retaliation, by which they would rotate the list of targeted goods every couple of months, that's truly meant to signal to Trump that there's going to be a difference between what he's going to witness now and what he witnessed in response to the Section 232 steel and aluminum tariffs in Trump 1.0. And for Canada and Mexico to both threaten non-tariffs, this is not the same old retaliatory actions that we saw in Trump 1.0. And that may get his attention as well.
Well, Professor Nicholas Lamp, is it just the attention that we're seeking, or we're also seeking a step back on the side of Donald Trump? Is this going to have, the kind of creative retaliatory tariffs that Professor Bush is talking about that are coming in from countries? Would we see a substantial impact by Donald Trump having stepped back, or at least sort of, reducing the kind of noise that he's been making on tariffs?
It's very hard to predict. With Trump, nobody knows really what he's going to do. Like most people in Canada, I think, still thought the tariffs would not go forward just a few days ago. So it's hard to know what will get his attention. I think, obviously, the stock market, as Professor Bush said. And I think in Canada, we're also thinking about creative ways to retaliate, for example, on US IP, because, of course, we're paying huge rents to Silicon Valley companies. And so there are ways we're considering of potentially loosening some IP restrictions that we have adopted under pressure from the Americans in order to actually benefit Canadian consumers. But there's, of course, always still a risk of further retaliation. And Canada, unfortunately, has to recognize we are in the weaker position here. And so we are very cautious not to escalate so far in order to provoke further escalation. But as I said earlier, unfortunately, even if he reacts to the pressure and the tariffs come off, the long-term damage to Canadian industry is done, right? Nobody is going to invest in Canada again, trying to rely on the US market, at least as long as Trump is in power. And so for Canada, it's a life and death struggle. We're looking at all options, including export restrictions on critical materials and on energy. But so there's still a fear of further escalation.
But can I also understand from you, Professor Lamp? Do you think Justin Trudeau leaving the Prime Minister's office would have an impact? Because, of course, now it's very public and it's very well known the kind of trolling that Donald Trump has been doing against Prime Minister Trudeau. Do you think him leaving would actually have an impact at all?
I don't think so. I don't think so, because Trump cares about, essentially, he doesn't want to trade with Canada. He thinks he doesn't need anything from Canada, which is wrong. I mean, they need potash for US agriculture. They need aluminium for the car industry. And obviously they need the oil. And there was some recognition that they need the oil because the tariffs on oil are only, oil and gas are only 10% instead of 25%. But it's his principal objective is to bring all the manufacturing and all the jobs back to the United States, and it doesn't really matter who is Prime Minister of Canada for that objective to be his primary goal.
Okay. Vivek Banka, here in India, we keep a track of the kind of tariffs that Donald Trump has been slapping against different countries. We are concerned about ourselves as well. Thankfully, we have not been on that list so far. But what should we expect then of the kind of ripple effect that these trade wars that are happening currently between US, Canada, Mexico, and China will have on us here in India? Because obviously supply chains will be disrupted. And as we were talking earlier, military equipment, iPhones, mobiles, oil and gas prices, all of these will be impacted. So it's not just that the trade wars are limited between these two countries. It's going to have its ripple effect on all of us.
In the short term, of course, everybody is in deep sea right now. Over the next 6 months, we do not know who will emerge as winners, who will emerge as losers. This is a change of world order, make no mistake about it, which has been there for the last many decades. Trump is clearly looking to change that world order, which was there. Of course, there are two things that you need to keep in mind. US still controls 25% of world GDP, and the big tech is all housed in the US. So there is a lot of negotiating power that the US holds. How he is going to use it is something which I said only time will tell. From an Indian perspective, what my strong belief is that despite short-term ramifications that India might also get sucked into over a long period of time, relatively, India has a great opportunity here because at some point in time, the US has to move towards some country for its import requirements. It cannot be an enemy to everybody. And the Indian share in terms of trade deficit versus China, Mexico, or Canada is much lower, approximately, I think, $50 billion. So from an Indian perspective, my sense is from a direct impact, we have much lesser to worry about. Of course, there could be direct impact in a certain, in certain sectors like pharmaceuticals, etc., which also, I guess, might get evened out. But over a long period of time, my belief is over 12 to 24 months, there is a big opportunity that India has, to shine versus other countries here on a relative basis.
Okay. Before I wrap up, Mr. Victor Gao, to you, how do you see this now moving forward? China and US, of course, have had this trade war under the Trump 1.0 presidency as well. Now, how do you think this is going to be moving forward?
Thank you very much. You are raising a very important question. China has been doing two things. One is to immediately impose retaliatory tariffs against some U.S. exports to China. Now, this is purely done in retaliation against the wrong tariffs that the Trump administration has imposed on Chinese export to the United States. If the Trump administration wants to further increase such illegitimate tariffs against China, China will further impose more sanctions and more tariffs against the U.S. exports to China. Now, the second thing China has been doing is to go to WTO to air the grievances and to expose the illegitimacy and the illegality of such wrong tariffs imposed by the U.S. government against China. China hopes other countries will join China in such litigation in front of the WTO. Now, the third thing China has been doing ever since 2023 is to impose export controls on the very important and indispensable rare earth metals and rare earth materials that are widely used in the United States, not only in semiconductors, but in many of the advanced defense materials and defense products. Without such rare earth material supplied by China to the United States, I'm afraid the U.S. defense industry will go bankrupt because they will have no such rare earth material to use in their finished products.
Okay.
I hope this will really awake the Trump administration. Doing such one-sided manhandling against China will only force China to retaliate back. And you need to know the full consequences of manhandling a big country like China. China will never succumb to such pressure from Washington.
Okay. All right, we'll have to wait and watch how this really pans out. I have to wrap it up here. Victor Gao, Vivek Banka, Professor Lamb and Professor Bush, thank you very much to all of you gentlemen. Who wins in the end is something that we'll have to wait and watch. That match continues.